So kind of gave you the brief a little bit. American Jiu-Jitsu, it's polarizing. It's your thing, of course. I feel like it's kind of synonymous with your brand. So maybe we can just kind of start at the beginning a little bit. When did you first kind of hear this term American Jiu-Jitsu, and I don't know, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think American Jiu-Jitsu for me has always just represented Americans who do Jiu-Jitsu. I think that's a totally reasonable title to attribute to someone who's an American who does Jiu-Jitsu and competes in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu events as an American. I'm not sure the polarization of it. I think people kind of attribute more meaning to it than it actually is. I think it's just a good way to kind of differentiate yourself as an American representing America in Jiu-Jitsu. Because you're not going to say, I'm a Brazilian or I'm an American Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitor. You just say, I'm an American who does Jiu-Jitsu. You can say I'm an American who does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I think like the semantics of that are not really relevant or important. For me, it's more just a way to actually represent what was a once really small group of people who were the only Americans really competing at the higher levels of Jiu-Jitsu. And to answer your question, I first heard about American Jiu-Jitsu way back when I started doing Jiu-Jitsu, and there were Americans doing it. Jeff Glover, Bill Cooper, Jake Shields, all those guys were competing as Americans in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitions in ADCC, and for me that always resonated with me because I looked up to those guys because there were so few Americans actually being able to be competitive in those at that level, and I think it just made sense to kind of have a name for it, a name for that group of people that can represent a shift in how Jiu-Jitsu is approached, because there definitely is, there's cultural differences between Brazil and America, and I think that reflects a lot in the actual Jiu-Jitsu itself and how people go about actually improving the techniques, or how they like to go about training, how they like to deal with the inner gym culture as well. All that stuff is different and changes depending on where you're at. It was personally important to me to kind of establish it, put it forward as actually being a thing, and not just oh yeah, there's American Jiu-Jitsu, those guys who kind of do, or who are American but do Jiu-Jitsu. But that was all it was. It didn't ever actually stand for anything. There was no actual official title of American Jiu-Jitsu. What is it actually? And so I think that definition remains to be seen. I don't think it has been completely filled out yet. I think it'd be hubris to put forth as what it is, because it hasn't become what it is yet. It's just a categorization of Americans who want to represent that they are American competing in a field that is dominated heavily by really talented Brazilian athletes. It can be really difficult as an athlete, an American athlete, to kind of break into that and be reach the potential of your career if it's all just kind of referenced back to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's just kind of it seems like it kind of
shifts a lot of American hard work and effort from just these guys to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu side of things. And I think there's room for not just a culture of Jiu-Jitsu, but a representation of different countries competing, just like in the Olympics. There's nothing new about that. You have judo guys competing from all these different countries, representing their country and fighting on this grand stage. And for the longest time, it was just 99% Brazilian athletes that just mopped the floor with everyone, and just slowly, there's a little bit of we took a little slice of the pie. A lot of the Americans are doing really well, and I think it's reasonable to be proud of the country you represent for that. And regardless of your feelings about different countries or anything like that, what the country actually represents, really it just represents where you're from. And I personally have been heavily influenced by many American Jiu-Jitsu competitors. I trained with BJ Penn, I trained with JT Torres. Throughout my career, everywhere I've trained has been with a core group of American guys, and that's not to say that, aside from Autos, but even Autos had a big group of American guys, and there's a great community there as well. And it was even joked about, American Jiu-Jitsu. I'd say it to Lucas all the time, oh, American Jiu-Jitsu just doesn't work against you, Lucas, because you'd always just beat me in the room, just stupid stuff like that. It doesn't have to be anything serious.